Local historian Danon Dizon lights a candle outside the church his family had built in 1877. He's a descendant of the town's founders and a guardian of this township's past. This is Angeles in the Philippines, now a city of 500,000, profoundly shaped by a long U.S. military presence. For almost 100 years, neighboring Clark was home to the biggest U.S. airbase outside the U.S. itself, and Subic Bay, just an hour down the road, hosted one of the U.S. Navy's chief bases. At the History Museum where he volunteers, Dizon recalls what it was like growing up in the presence of the U.S. military.
It was a staging area for logistics during the Korean War and in the Vietnam War, which I saw with my own eyes. Most of the casualties and wounded personnel were evacuated at the Clark Hospital. So they were treated there prior being brought back to the States. So when I was little, I would sit on the grass and watch the planes fly full of bombs.
But in the early 1990s, U.S. troops left this area for good, driven out by a powerful volcanic eruption and a decree from the Philippine government. Defense analysts say the 30 years since have given China room to flex its growing military might in the region. China has increasingly pressed its claims over the entirety of the South China Sea, rejecting the Philippines' competing claims to sovereignty in the area. Beijing not only patrols the disputed waters frequently, clashing with Philippine fishermen, it also makes regular military incursions on nearby Taiwan, another territory it claims. In 2012, a standoff with the Chinese Coast Guard finally led to a rethink in both Manila and in Washington.
At the time, the Philippine government didn't have any assets to respond to the incident, and critically, neither did the United States. So the nearest basing presence of the United States at the time was in Guam and in Japan. So really, there was really no rapid response force by the United States that's able to respond to that mass sudden escalation in Coast Guard and military presence by China in the South China Sea.
Since then, the Philippines has given the U.S. access to a growing number of bases, 9 as of early 2024. So far, troop numbers are small, just a few hundred, a far cry from the hundreds of thousands once stationed across the Philippines. But analysts say the Philippine government may expand this presence after the coming U.S. presidential election. Crucially, 3 of the bases are in the far north of the country, with easy access to Taiwan. And one is within an hour of Angeles, bringing the possibility U.S. troops could become a common sight again here, too.
So I think that's there's a big obligation, actually, since Taiwan is just our neighbor, and it's just a few thousand miles away from, 100 miles away from. So I think the Philippines has the obligation to, personally, to protect that, since China has some aggressive moves.
Not everyone shares this view. Former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte is one notable opponent of conflict with China and a larger U.S. presence. And there's also the question of whether Manila would even let U.S. troops use these 9 bases to help Taiwan. But some believe that Philippine officials would quickly allow it if war broke out.
When push comes to shove, the intention, the hope there is that the Philippines will authorize such military actions to defend Taiwan, right? And of course, they will find a lot of support for that, especially in the Philippine military establishment that considers status quo in Taiwan as a core national interest of the Philippines. Because if China conquers Taiwan, that frees up China's military resources so they can concentrate in the South China Sea.
All are agreed, though, that the U.S. return to the Philippines is changing the calculus in a region that's become a potential global flashpoint. And its renewed presence in localities like Angeles will have an impact far beyond the Philippines itself. Luffy Lee and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.